I recently did an interview with John McCracken. John McCracken was the guy that ran the Pledge campaign, which attempted to make some albums with Allan Holdsworth in his final years. He put forth his version of events. It was a very interesting chat. So interesting that the views on it for an interview have gone through the roof. I think it's the biggest viewed video of this month. And last time I looked, it was around about 25,000 views. I have lost track of the comments on there, and I received a message saying that Eddie Jobson, the great legendary Eddie Jobson, had disagreed with some of the things John had said. Somebody else alerted to me to this. I could not find the comment. It might show you the sort of situation I'm in. If I've done 7 videos that week and they're all sort of doing 1,000 comments, I've got 1,000 comments to go through. I searched, tried to find it, couldn't find it. And that upset me because Eddie Jobson is an absolute legend. I would love to interview him on this channel. I would love to talk about his time with Frank Zappa, or I'd love to talk about his time in UK. I'd love to talk about his beliefs about music and all that. That would be an incredible thing, and also give him a chance to put his side of the story across. But it is a story. So last night, a very, very close friend of Alan's, who'd been friends with Alan for many decades, he got in touch, and we had a 3-hour conversation. He didn't want it recorded, but I initially didn't want to do that. I thought, I haven't got the time to just talk to someone and there not be content for the channel. I'd rather get up and do something about Weather Report or somebody else and just get away from this. But he kept chatting to me, and I thought, well, maybe I'll talk to him, and then the following morning I'll get up, and with that conversation in my head, I will come down here and talk about whatever comes out of that conversation. And that is what I'm about to do now. There's going to be another video here. And what I'm going to be talking about here is the enigma of Allan Holdsworth, and how, however much we are compelled to try and understand this genius, we're never going to understand him. And that is something that became apparent in my 3-hour interview with this guy. I'm going to try and discuss that here on this video. If you're interested in this, I'm going to go into a whole bunch of different areas, and I'm also going to be calling out a certain toxicity that exists around that guy. There's a toxicity around Allan Holdsworth. I'm going to be going into that. I'm not going to be naming any names on here, but I am going to be calling it out. So this is going to be a contentious video, and I hope that I can then have my definitive statement, because the answer to a lot of the critics I've had on that video interview with John, I have had to say, look, go and look at the totality of videos I've done on Allan Holdsworth. Go through them all. And you will realize that with any contentious subject, with all these things that are going on around this man, and all the different ideas and all the different opinions, and the people say, I knew John, and I knew Alan, and he knew this, and I knew Alan, and he knew this. Alan wasn't like this, Alan was like this, and all this stuff that's going on, that the fact is that it becomes like JFK's assassination. Or, more closely, another musician that we talked about at length, who this guy also had known, Jaco Pastorius. The same sort of things emerged around him. I started to think about the idea of genius musicians and the fire that they're playing with, and the spark that creates that fire, and how that fire can take that person on one path or another. Allan actually wasn't, what's the word? He wasn't the angelic genius that some people want to describe him as. And he wasn't the out of control, sort of tragic figure that other people want to portray him as. That we will never get to the bottom of it. Now, let's start with why we want to get to the bottom of it. Why is it a musician like Allan Holdsworth, who spent most of his life in obscurity, trying to scrape a living, going around the world playing gigs to, a handful of people where, as John said, he would have to say on certain gigs, make sure you buy the merchandise, because if you're not, we've got nowhere to stay tonight. We won't be able to afford a hotel. That somebody who lived their life like that when they died, has now become such a touchstone that I can make a video interview, and my interviews never do good views on my channel. It's my videos that do good views. But as soon as I put up Allan Holdsworth, the final years, so many people saw that and they wanted to know about the final years. I wanted to know about the final years, right? John was willing to talk about the final years. This other guy that I spoke to last night was incredible, Tommy Holbert. He didn't want to go on camera and talk about it, however, right? So you start to see how this works. You start to see there's all these things going on. Now, where am I going to start with this? I'm going to start with my mate, Roy Marchbank. Roy Marchbank is one of the few musicians I've worked with and I've chatted with who's a genius. And being a genius, he approaches music in a different way to me, which I find incredibly compelling, but also quite exhausting in a way. Roy is a guitarist that wants to play the sounds that are in his head, and he wants to express his own individuality. He has been on a journey in life which is almost like semi-mystical. He's traveled the world and he's developed a guitar technique which is unparalleled. He has taken the guitar to his own place, not Allan Holdsworth, not Sean Lane. He's taken the guitar to his own place, which is his, which he owns, and which is jaw-dropping in the world that it creates. And I see a parallel with him to Allan Holdsworth. When you chat with Roy, he will sit in a room and he's trying to play something that nobody's ever played before. I'm quite happy to sit and play any old cliche, and I'm a serious musician and I want to do creative work. But Roy's cut from a different cloth. He wants to do something with the guitar where people will go, I've never heard that before, right? and he wants to express something which is essentially mystical. That's what I know about Roy. Now, Roy is same age as me. He's been around for a number of decades. So why is he in the same sort of level of obscurity as Allan Holdsworth? The reason is because there's toxic individuals out there that are protecting whatever legacy they believe they have in the guitar world by spreading malicious lies about him. And they have accused him of being a fake. They have accused him of cheating. They have not afforded him the same level of study that they have afforded other guitarists. Now, why would they want to do that? The reason is because when Allan died, Allan was such a compelling figure. So many people had been obsessed by him. There was an army of people that were like working at every single lick, trying to work out every single chord. There's another army looking at all the theory and the scales he's using. There's another army that was like documenting every gig and filming it. There's another army that were collecting all the bootlegs. There's another army that were collecting all the sort of photographs and stories and interviewing people. There's this whole army around Allan. And why? Because I see myself as being in that army. We want to understand the genius, and you can't. But you think if you can nail it and map it and hold it down, you know, like the butterfly that flitters passes and go, I've got it. And then we look and it's just a mess splattered on the floor. And he goes, but that doesn't look like this free and beautiful fluttering thing. Why? I've got it now and I can't see where the beauty is. And I think great artists have that aspect. Of course, when Allan died, these people that then they felt that they were the keeper of the flames. There's a lot of keepers of flames out there for Allan. Same thing happened to Sean Lane. Same things happens to Jaco Pastorius. These people come along and suddenly they're the keeper of the flames. You can't go to Allan anymore. So people go to them and they feel like they own a part of it and they start making decisions. Now, the problem I have with that is I'm the same with Allan. So I think I have an idea of what he creatively would have wanted to happen. And I don't feel that, you know, people putting out live albums that he didn't want put out is what Allan creatively would have wanted. He never put any music out for the sort of last 20 odd years of his life. Why? Because he wasn't happy with it. If they could find it now, they would put it out. Allan didn't want it out. That was it. He didn't want it out. I respect that, right? He didn't like people studying what he was doing. He didn't like people learning his licks. And yet there's people now putting books out and publishing, this is his licks, this is this. And they have a perfect right to. It's a free country. They can transcribe it and put it out there, right? Well, if Allan Holdsworth would he approve of this? Absolutely not.
No, if it's too blatant, then I don't like it so much because it's like, oh, you could have spent just as much time trying to figure out how you want to do something as you did trying to figure out what that was. The only ones that get offensive are really when it gets too deep into it. Then I really don't like that because I think that person or that individual could have spent more time trying to develop their own voice rather than trying to figure out how somebody developed their voice. You know, trying to emulate somebody to a point is okay, but after a certain point, it becomes a little obnoxious. You know,
those people in themselves, they are not doing anything wrong, but I don't agree with it. But what I see is they then try and protect the legacy and they want their position in it. So everyone's got the story to tell. Now, that's where we start from. When Roy Marchbank emerged, he was doing something that was related to Allan Holdsworth in that he was an incredible legato player and he was actually playing faster and using even more bizarre scales. But knowing Roy's playing, his interests were much different harmonically than Allan Holdsworth's were. But there's a relationship there. His picking, it was like beyond Sean Lane's. So the Sean Lane lot and those people who were there going, oh, Allan Holdsworth, we worship at the shrine. Sean Lane, we worship at the shrine. We worship. Who's this fellow? No, like, let's see what this guy's doing. It's about fake guitar that you do.
Some of that stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll speed it up afterwards when we get home. When you are someone like Roy and you've worked that hard and someone says you're faking it, it's deeply upsetting. It almost destroys the person's character. In the same token, if you're like Allan Holdsworth and you were transcribing his stuff and trying to play like him, this hurt him as a person. He was a sort of guy, from what I've been told, that if someone started playing one of his licks, he stopped playing that lick. I have a deep respect for this sort of intention of the artist, but there's a toxicity around it. It's because he's dead and everyone's got a story to tell and everyone's trying to, maintain their position. So the thing I respected about John McCracken is that when he got in touch with me and started to tell me about the pledge campaign, which I was aware of. Now, I say I'm aware of, but when you start talking to people about it, they'll get online and they'll go, oh, well, so-and-so said this. When they went to that gig, the guy that was mowing the lawn outside when Alan's doing that interview? Well, he did this and he did that. And so-and-so was talking to so-and-so and they bought a wig off Joe-and-so. Jeff Berlin was there and he was doing this, but Jimmy Hapson was there. And they tell you this like you are privy to this world. They have taken this world, which is like this, and they've expanded it into the totality of their experience. They're inside it. They're all inside this world that Alan created.
No, let the laundress go first. No, dear, you was here first. After you, I'm sure. Oh, look how Jerry's a chance. The chow lady and the laundress and the undertaker having all met here at the same time without meaning it.
Couldn't met in a better place. Let's go into the parlour.
Within this world, you had a thing that has been going on now many, many years ago. I met up with some mates of mine and they said, I was chatting to a guy in the States. They booked Alan to do a guitar clinic. And Alan, and now this is what the guy said. I'm not saying this is the truth because this is the issue of this video. My friend said, he goes, of course, Alan's now a raging alcoholic. So 11 o'clock, he was in the pub. By the time he got to the clinic, it was pointless. And he's doing this all the time. And so these stories were circulating within no one would have said this in public, but that's what everybody was saying about Alan. The stories of his behavior were starting to become quite mythical. When there's a musician and they're out on tour, and if they are getting drunk, then stories start to emerge about that musician. The books like The Dirt by Motley Crue, Bill Makowski's book on Jacko, let's be fair, many of us have bought it because we want those stories. We want to hear about Jacko riding in a motorbike into the hotel lobby with a squid up his shirt. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear those type of things. And we want to hear it about Alan. Now, I think a lot of us want to hear it about Alan because it's hard to believe that a genius would be like that. It's like interesting and it's compelling. Now, in the industry, even though these stories are circulating and they all could be untrue, I have never met anybody who's going to say, I'll come on your channel and talk about what I saw. Now, John's motivation was to do that is I think he was treated very badly in trying to get some albums out of Alan, and it not happening. And when you talk to people who run labels or manage bands or these, and you talk about how they're having to deal with troublesome musicians, they can be trying to run a business, and then when you describe the business from a musician's point of view, it seems like they're being quite callous. Well, who in business is not callous? You have to try and make it work. I think that Allan Holdsworth is such a musical genius, and no one appreciated it till he had gone. From my point of view of being a punter, when I first heard Allan Holdsworth, it was in around about, I'd say about 84, 85. I was into prog. I went and bought a Soft Machine album, and that album was called Land of Cocaine. It's an album which the Soft Machine fans don't like that much because it's more of a Carl Jenkins album. It follows on from albums like War of the Worlds and Variations, and it's Soft Machine with a sort of orchestrated by Carl Jenkins. I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely incredible. Not a Soft Machine album. On a couple of tracks is Allan Holdsworth, and on the track Sly, I heard this guitar solo and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It just changed me so deeply. Now, at that point, I was listening to all sorts of fast guitarists and I'd been into all of that. Alan was doing something else. I was astonished by every aspect of it. It was so astonishing that I thought, is that a guitar? Is that the guitar solo? Well, it says there's a guitar solo on here. He says on the album that he's playing. I can't hear. I don't know what I'm listening to. What am I listening to? Is that a violin? What is it? What am I listening to? What's going on here? Nobody could play the guitar that fast. What's happening with the sound? What's going on? I was like, I was pulled into Allan's world. Millions of people have had that. It's had that effect. Once I went nuts on him, then I'm trying to grab every album of Allan Holdsworth. I'm playing it to my friends, and they're going, yeah, it's just fast guitar play. There's no emotion. It's just scales. I mean, yeah, he's really fast. And I'm like, can't you hear it? You can't hear it? No, I can't hear it. And I'm thinking, I know why they can't hear it. It's because they haven't been brought up on jazz like me. They didn't have the dad, Miles Davis and Duke Ellington and Jerry Mulligan, the modern jazz quartet, and then me going from there to Miles Davis and John Coltrane. And I could hear what was going on. And my dad taught me well. He would sit me down as like a 6 or 7 year old and put a jazz record on. And he'd talk his way through the solos. That guy's doing that guy, and as a little kid going, what, they're making that up? Yeah, they're making that up. Well, how do they know what they're doing? I said, you go. And I can remember my dad when I was very young say, just sing the song through it. Okay, and he'd rewind it back or whatever on the album, drop the needle on the solo again. And I'd be going, and I'm singing that, and they're going, and I'm going, and I'm singing it and go, whoa, is that what they're doing? It's like you've got a tune, and then these guys take the tune and turn it into a better tune. Nobody could write that, and I was just blown away by it. And the idea of a form and playing to the form. I had all those skills from a little kid. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. There's my dad. There's a bit of my dad in that blue box there. His ashes in that box there. I brought them up because half of these records are his. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my dad. Now, we get onto an interesting thing with Allan Holdsworth when we get to his dad. Right, because now I'm going to move away from that sort of the toxicity of the sort of legacy management by so many agents and elements out there, and the whole thing that's moving around, which is feeding off this idea that just people, musicians out there like you, want to understand this guy. You're not interested in the fact he was an alcoholic or not an alcoholic. Was he bipolar? Was he did he have manic depression? What was his mental illness? What was wrong with him? I tell you what was wrong with him. He was a genius. And there are musicians that are just great at music. They get bought with music in the house, man. They have perfect pitch. They can hear more than everybody else. And they're great at music. And I've known many musicians like that, but they're not really that bothered about it. Some people are bothered about it. They want to entertain the people. They want to get in front of an audience. They want to, they want to use their talents. That's it. Allan wasn't that. Allan was a player. He wanted to express himself through improvisation. So he was like a jazz musician, but he wasn't like a jazz musician in that he wanted to do everything in a unique way. And he was driven to do that. Now, the psychology of what Allan did is fascinating. And now it's a myth. As a boy, he had this great big book. He went through every scale combination, blah, blah, blah. He went through, I can use that, I cannot use that. He didn't have like a normal way of thinking of harmonies. Now, all these things he describes to me, that's like, I thought like that when I started. It's like another way. It's almost like a naive way of seeing music. And Allan seemed so single-minded in what he wanted to do that he would not budge. I feel that trait I call it the curse of the strong.
We're now at Morton Shore, and locals believed it was here that King Canute... No, it's on film. It's on film. Look at that, I'm so...
It's people who have a definite idea about something and they want to enact it, but they're full of all the sort of idiosyncrasies and foibles and self-doubt that we all have. But you put those two things together, go, I'm full of self-doubt, I don't know whether I'm worthy, blah, 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 but I've really got to enact this. That's a recipe for a terrible mix of things, as you try and do the best. You're not assertive, maybe. You haven't got the control over the business, but you are not going to be budged, whatever can. And you will not be budged to the point where you will, if pushed into a corner, you will just still keep fighting, even if it means you turn the fight back on yourself. This is a massively strong trait in geniuses, right? I have stated here over and over again, I think that creativity is often seen as a mental health issue because these people who are creative are essential for the future of us, of mankind. So you need characters in there that aren't like balanced. They don't have the straight line that most people have. Something's exaggerated. It makes them really good at seeing patterns, or it makes them really good at they want to find out the truth. They want to express a certain music idea. They want to change the nature of art. They want to change the politics, whatever it is. Some people have this, and so their sort of personality line is not flat. It's exaggerated, and those exaggerated in certain situations are great. I'll give you an example. Take a psychotic person. We don't like psychotic people, cruel, nasty, that enjoy inflicting pain and creating chaos. What's the point in them? Well, I tell you, if you're in a battle and you've got the Nazis, somebody bearing them down on you, and there's 10 of you in the field and you've got to fight, and then that's one bloke that's going, I bloody love this, come on, let's get him, I'm going to cut their bloody neck, I'm going to poke him in the eyes, that guy there, you go, oh, thank God he's here. I'll just walk up behind him, I'll be friends with him. I hope I don't need to, because I don't know where this is directed, to be honest, but at the moment, can you go with this? I go, just find that up. Every single mental health thing that I come across in my life, I go, but it's a massive positive to the rest of us for having somebody like that. They think they're tortured until that situation arises. I suffer with anxiety, that's my thing. I think Alan suffered with anxiety, I think that's the same thing. Massive anxiety, I suffer. Now, the time in my life, this morning I woke up and I lay on the bed and I try and meditate. I'm so panicky, it's completely impossible. I start doing my breathing exercises. And when I do that, I lie on the bed doing that, listening to all the sounds outside, and it doesn't help. But in that, once my mind quiets down, I realise that there's this thing in my body that's going, I don't know if you remember this, that's what I've got going on all the time. It's a bit like I can't stop revving the engine, I've got my foot on the brake. Now, the only time I don't have that is when I'm playing music, and when the music is a very specific type of music, jazz basically improvised. If I can get in the zone, on one of these videos, it does the same thing. That's why I create so many videos, because if I'm talking to you, it's like it's taken up by this, I can then funnel it into this. My mind works quicker, I'm quite happy to come and talk, I'm never going to make a mistake, I'm never going to jump this, handle this idea, put 10 ideas into the punch. What I'm doing here with you, I am walking through a whole things I want to say, I know what I want to say, and I want to say it in a certain way, but I want to feel like you've been taken on a journey, and I want to go talk fast, I don't want to trip myself up, I want to go forward, and I want to create like a virtuoso chat, and I'm Holdsworth, and you sit there and go, wow, yeah, where are we going with this? How are you covering this? That's quite interesting, I like that. Where are we going with this? And I'm aware of that. We're coming up to half an hour, this could well be an hour, I don't know, but this is the point where the video starts to have to turn over, I'm aware of that as well. All these things are motivated by my anxiety. Now, if something happened and everybody ran in and said, this place is on fire, we've got to get out, in those situations I become completely calm. Come on, everyone, I just find out I'm just like, it's like I'm sat there with this anxiety, because I'm ready. You're having a good time. You're all happy, are you? You're all happy, don't worry. I'm sat here anxious all the time, so if anything does happen, I'll spot it. I'm going to crack in the wall, What is that being left on for? My anxiety is then mixed with an absolute lack of organisation at the same time. So when I say that, I'm not like that at all, I'm some person that walks out the house, leave some candles burning, don't blow them out, don't burn the house down, I'll come back out the house. And I go through life panicking about that. And I'm pretty sure my ineptitude of being able to cross the T's and dot the I's because I'm in a dream world, my creative thing, is part of the reason why I'm so anxious, because going through life like that means I create disasters around me, I've got disasters tomorrow, and it's all down to this understanding of my intentions and that happens to me all the time. Anyway, and I look at Alan, I'm not a genius like Allan Holdsworth, I wish I was, or I don't know if I wish I was. I think I might be happy with the amount of ability I've got musically, I'm happy with that. But I do look at it and go, if I'm like that, what's it like being Alan? Alan was born in 1946. The year before, another guitarist was born in the UK, and he's almost like the polar opposite of Allan Holdsworth, Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton was a massive innovator, right? Eric Clapton is an innovator because in 1966 or 65, I can't remember the year, I think it could be 65, right? He'd been listening to Indian classical music. and he'd been hearing the sound of various Indian instruments, and he was into the blues, and he wanted to be able to play the blues, but with that sound, with the long sustained notes and the bends. He wanted to get that. And he had been playing extremely loud in the in John Mayall's group. And he was getting that by utilizing feedback and distortion. He goes into a studio, and a very uptight studio engineer gets very upset and says, we can't record the guitar that loud. And he, being a very shy and quiet guy, stands by his guns. And in standing by his guns, they record what eventually becomes the Beano album. And in that, Eric Clapton, and you may want to criticize him, but he invents rock guitar at that point. Eric Clapton's influence on future guitarists is profound. I would love to know the influence that Clapton had on Holdsworth. I believe it's there, and I believe it will be profound. Because there was a certain concept around distortion and compression and long notes and Indian classical modal improvisation that came in at that point. And before you know it, Cream are laying the groundworks for a sort of electric rock-based improvisational approach. Holdsworth's going to end up playing with Jack Bruce extensively. When he tries to strike out on his own in the late 70s, before he meets Gary Husband and those guys, the IOU guys, he puts the band together with John Heisman and Jack Bruce. Jack Bruce plays a part. Allan's linked to that group of guitarists. He's linked into that. He comes out of that world. Allan too has got an idea of how he wants to play the guitar, and he's not going to budge either. Now, what I find fascinating, and I have not the knowledge of psychology, but I will offer this as a fact, is Eric and Allan are both post-war children that grew up in the 1950s as rock and roll was emerging, who saw the guitar as being the instrument of rock and roll. Much as Allan said he didn't want to play the guitar, the idea that you were born in 1946 and ignored what Buddy Holly was doing or Hank Marvin seems ridiculous to me. So in that era, the guitar then becomes the preeminent instrument in the 1960s. It replaces the saxophone because of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And then Clapton comes on and it creates this idea of the guitarist as this expressive force coming within rock music, pulling on jazz and blues. And Holdsworth's there at the same time. But the thing that unifies them, to me, which is really odd, is the fact that they were both brought up by their grandparents. And the reason is because their mother was young and had met an American soldier or a Canadian soldier in Allan's case, that the mom had got pregnant, the soldier had gone back, and then they'd grown up thinking that their grandfather was their father. And they'd both had then the influence of not the generation above them, not the post-war generation. They're actually very, very scarred by the nature of that war. You know, kids that were having babies in the 1940s were living in a world where they didn't know whether their babies would grow up. They were in the apocalypse as far as they're concerned. And I know this because certain people I know of my parents' age who had, psychological help with their problems. A lot of it was related to the fear that their mothers had, bringing them up into a world that seemed quite chaotic at the time. We also see that in musicians like Roger Waters, in the work that he did. We also see that in musicians like Pete Townsend. Holdsworth actually is the same era as them and shares this sort of parental trauma. And I think that rejection that you must feel of not having your parents there, and then the grandparents coming in, instilling sort of set of values that goes back probably to the 1920s, the generation before, hitting the 1960s, entering into the 1960s with a very shy and quiet demeanor, not confident about who you are, but having the curse of the strong. So when you are in that, you quietly say, no, you record the guitar the way it is. That trait of Clapton's is the same as Holdsworth. It's really interesting that those two things are there and they're linked by that. Now, Eric Clapton, he makes his great statement in the 60s. You know, by the time we get to Derek and the Dominoes, his creative spark is running out. And the reason for that is his unrequited love for George Harrison's wife sends him into a spiral of drug addiction. He eventually exits that, and he then spirals into alcoholism. And his buddy is alcoholism. If you watch an interview with Eric in the 60s, he's really respectful. Some of the stuff he said on race and black people is so beautiful, considering, you know, by 78 he was, you know, throwing out tirades of drunkard abuse at the audience. But you could see that he sought solace, this quiet, gentle, shy guy, but with the curse of the strong, takes solace in the companionship that comes with alcoholism. Eric Clapton, when you see him walk out in the late 70s, he's on stage, he's Larry, he's the life and soul of the party. You can see that. Allan was too, right? I can remember watching an interview with Eric Clapton when I was very young, and he said, he says, when you're a creative person, you look into the abyss. And when you look into the abyss, he didn't say this, but it was, I'm trying to paraphrase it. What he did say is when you're a creative person and you look into that void, you are on your own and you feel very lonely. Now, if you feel very lonely, when I felt very lonely, say some girlfriends left me and I'm all on my own, I'm sitting in the house, what do? You put your nice shirt on, you go down the pub, but you need a bit of Dutch courage, you know, but you want to be with people, so you get in there and you start drinking. I'm teetotal because of a period that happened around about 2006 when my drinking went out of control, and it was because I was out in that environment. And it's not me, it's just not me at all. So I stopped drinking in 2009, and that and a few other things that I changed has inoculated me against the terrible void which opens up when you are a creative person. Allan Holdsworth had this in buckets. I believe that Allan was able to negotiate this all the way up until his divorce, and it seems that seemed to set him off on a spiral, but the divorce wasn't the cause. What the divorce did was put Allan in a certain place, and that loneliness and genius that he had to deal with in a certain way. And my conclusion of this is, yes, the last few years, Allan didn't seem to be 100%. But he didn't die like Jacko. He didn't die like Hendrix. He got to 70, and he made, for me, the most important instrumental statement of the second half of the 20th century. So I want to finish this video saying, I have no idea what Holdsworth was, and we are not in a position to know or say. He's not here anymore. We won't know whether he had mental health issues or not, and if he did, we won't know the level they had, right? We have no right to talk about it. We don't understand it. That man needs to be left as he is. He needs to be left, and we have to listen to the music and marvel. And when we watch the interviews by him and we see people transcribing, we have to understand that none of this will ever let us know, because he was an enigma. And he controlled that. He made a tuition video that asked more questions than it answered, right? In interviews, he was quite elliptical. I feel when people ask questions of how he did something, he often said the opposite to what it actually was. He had a certain belief about his art, and I think he had to protect it to maintain it. And I think the music industry changed, and he grew up in a time when it was changing. And Allan Holdsworth was designed to be playing in a band and going to a recording studio and make that record. And then he was supposed to walk away from it wanting to die because it wasn't perfect, but there was nothing he could do about it, right? He wasn't designed for a world where the production techniques, especially when it moved to the digital, meant that you could try and attain perfectionism. And that's the message of this video. Creative people, that enemy that lurks in the void that will come and destroy them is perfectionism. It's this idea that you have got to be perfect and not make a mistake. And if you do make a mistake, you've been damned and people will judge you. Now, I wonder if that is rooted in Well, a psychologist once told me that when you're born, your brain is being formed, and your brain isn't just here. Your brain's connected to your spinal cord, and that goes down to your body, and then it branches out in your nerves. So your brain is your whole body, and it's taking in information and it's feeding back information like this, right? When you're born, you are completely helpless, and you look into the world and you don't understand any of it. And you're programmed to focus on a face. You're programmed to focus on the face and the eyes, and that will be your mother's eyes. And your mother will look down, and they will send a message from them to the baby by looking at them. The love that is in there between the mother and the baby, that passes. And now that brain is developing the whole time. That brain is developing within the cradle of the love of the mother. And all those structures are made, right? If the baby has diarrhea and it feels that and it starts to panic, the mother goes, don't panic, blah, blah, blah. If they have a stomach ache, that's what they have. If they throw up, and this was my counsellor, he said most trauma is caused by those messages from your mother hasn't created the sort of straight line inside the baby. And he said, so you are regulating all the information in your body, and suddenly a thought will come into your head. You have not been protected against that thought. So you need to deal with it. And then that affects your body. And he said to me once, he says, as soon as you feel like that, you will try and press it down. And the more you press it down, the more it then starts to come up. And he would often say to me, are you feeling panicky? And I'd say, yes. And he goes, where is it? I said, I'm thinking I'm going to have diarrhea. And he would get that feeling to move from the diarrhea to the gut, to the chest. He would talk this up, and I would feel this coming up, and it would go into my neck. And then I would burst out crying. I hadn't even thought anything. I would burst out crying, and then I'd feel fine. Half an hour later, it was back. But it was that process. And I went to this. Now, imagine that your mother's not your mother. And imagine your mother's not there, and she doesn't really want to know about you that much, and your dad buggered off. So you have a certain structure from your grandparents, and it's an old-fashioned structure. And maybe of a time when that sort of love wasn't shown so much, I don't know. I mean, those people went smack into the war, didn't they? They were that generation that were tough. You know, but I believe that's where this lies. And I see Clapton and Holdsworth related in that way. Now, if you're like that, then what basically you have psychologically is the inability, and we all have this to a certain extent, to not be able to go, I'm okay as I am. You know, that'll do. I can't do any more. Sorry, this is me. I can't do it. And I've known people like that. They're brilliant people. Oh, I just can't do that. I'm no good at that. You know, that's the best you're going to get from me. Right? Allan Holdsworth, he had a terrifying idea that he had done something that wasn't absolutely perfect. And I think that was because he believed he needed to be perfect. I think he had a relationship with his father. I had a very similar relationship with my dad, that he pushed me as a drummer. If I practiced, he would come down and go, you did that wrong and you're speeding up there. You need to do that. And I'm glad he did it. But it was a harsh upbringing for me. And I would then go back upstairs and work on whatever he said. And my intention was to beat him. And one day I was playing and he went, I don't know what you're doing anymore. And that was wonderful, but I was sort of in no man's land. So I started to look around for other people. And those other people weren't my dad, so they weren't looking after me. And, you know, I'd get people in bands or bosses or whatever it is, and I'd be trying to get that from them as a young musician, and they don't give it to you. They manipulate you. The industry comes along and takes that and chews it up and throws you out. Allan Holdsworth would have had that in bucket loads. You know, he spends the 70s working for somebody else, and you know he's just not satisfied. He goes to everybody, Tony Williams, Tempest, who else? Gong, UK. You know, he just goes on and on. John Ponty. And then he gives up on all that, and then he becomes a solo artist. So then he's pretty much a solo artist, and then he's completely on his own terms. And there is a glorious period in the 80s, I believe, when he is producing music that can only be described by as Allan Holdsworth. As digital technologies come in, the perfectionism starts to destroy him. And once he's in that zone and he knows there's a greater possibility of being perfect, but you can't be perfect, that is the point where you don't want to play anymore. The very thing that has been feeding into you. I think that's what Alan's problem was. I know what that's like. I would say the last 20 years, I've been battling. I'm looking at my drum kit now. It's right in front of me. I've been battling of whether I want to play that anymore. It's not the friend it once was. Not the friend it once was to me. I'm battling with perfectionism. I'm battling with wanting to have a technical ability that I haven't got, being able to express things in a certain way. It's torturing me, always has done. As a kid, I was a fighter, and I came at it 6, 7 hours, 8 hours a day, and I was young, and I knew the world was in front of me. I think I suffer with a similar thing to Alan. I suppose that's it. I don't know if that's arrogant. I would never say I've got a 1% of his talent. But I think I suffer with the same thing. Perfectionism comes along and destroys people. People like Jaco Pastorius, their perfectionism is in this sort of bolstered up self-image where they think, like the Ingrid Malmsteens in the world, they just think that they are the king. And then there's other people that see themselves as absolutely wretched. They're the Allan Holdsworth. And then there's the other people that inoculate themselves against this by pursuing a spiritual path. The Carlos Santadas, the John McLaughlins, the Narada Michael Waldens. They don't die. They become very old. In many cases, they become very old and look still very young. They have the best of what music offers them, but because they do not see it as being them, but see themselves as being a cog in the machine and them imparting beauty into a world that's created by God, and God has the responsibility for that beauty. God is where that beauty comes from, and you are just a vessel within that. That's a wonderful way of seeing the world, and knowing that if you can enact that properly, then the world will open up and be your friend. The world's not going to try and destroy you. You don't have to seek solace in a bottle to try and anesthetize yourself against the horrors that you see all around you. Narada Michael Walden, who's a friend of me and a friend of the channel, once said that he realized, being a musician, and he's an incredibly creative musician, that if he didn't follow the spiritual path, he would go the same way if his friends, and he came up the same time as Jaco Pastorius and Doug Rausch and Larry Young and a whole bunch of people that are no longer with us and died 40 years ago. Alan didn't do that. Alan was clever enough with his family and his wife and his real ale and his bike riding and his interests in normal people in a pub, having a laugh, very English sort of hobbity way of existing. He was able to inoculate himself against that, and that meant him not being the genius, but just being the funny guy in the bar, having another drink. We all know those types of characters. It's a type of English spiritualism. It's also, in our love of fishing and our love of having a cup of tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is what I call English Zen. Holdsworth, being a good, solid Yorkshire man, had English Zen. John McLaughlin, being a good, solid Yorkshire man, decided to go out and embrace the whole world. John McLaughlin's still with us. He is now 83, is he? His hands aren't working so well, and it seemed that Holdsworth was suffering with that. But John has been able to accept that as being part of the beautiful machinery that the world is. Alan was able to do it to some extent. That's my conclusion. He got to 70, right? He made some incredible music. He had a lot of friends. We all love him very much. We will never understand what it is to be a quiet, shy person, but so committed to your aesthetic goals that you change music forever. And now every single jazz musician that gets up and solos now and wants to appear virtuoso is no longer channeling just Art Tatum and Charlie Parker. No longer channeling those. They're also channeling Allan Holdsworth. And the jazz world might have, they might have poo-pooed him at the time. Not anymore. What should have happened? What should have happened is we had a society that valued art so much and was able to really see the value of art that they would go to people like me who know about it and say, if you've got a grant, give it to Allan Holdsworth. He needs it. Give him a ton of money, let him buy a nice house out in the countryside or on the beach somewhere, and let him do whatever he wants. If he wants to sit and drink himself silly, at least he can drink himself silly, and he doesn't have to go out on tour. He doesn't have to make albums. He can just do whatever he wants. You look after them. We look after our artists. We see that they're a special breed. We pay them back for what they've done. Allan Holdsworth is not about album sales. It's not about, filling stadiums. It's about the fact that he changed music, and he changed music, which means he changed the world. And no one will ever see this because it's not like, you can't nail it. It's not like a truth. It's not like a scientific truth. And the plebs don't understand that. But those musicians, like the Jaco Pastoriuses, like the Allan Holdsworths, these tragic characters, we should have looked after them as a society. We should have. We pour millions into the arts and we protect a whole bunch of people that don't need protecting. They're either not creative enough, they don't add anything to it, or they're already supported by the fact that they're upper middle class and they've got money behind them and they're clever enough to know how to access those funds. I have railed against this in the jazz world. The jazz world is like, jazz is the great American classical music. It's the black American classical music. That's where the funding goes. And there's musicians who are just sat on funding, and that's how they can keep going. The likes of the Scott Hendersons and Schofields and all the actual real jazz geniuses that are at work at the moment, that were too old to really understand how the internet works, so they can't do that snarky puppy thing. They are still in their 70s, going around playing the clubs. Schofield got clean. When was that? 30 years ago now, I believe he got clean. So he's still around, thank God. He found his way through it. Scott Henderson, I don't know whether anything about his troubles, whether he ever had troubles like that, but I believe he's the greatest guitarist alive on the planet at the moment. Gambale seems happy. He's happily married. His music is as technically incredible as Holdsworth, but he comes from a much happier place. So I am going to keep doing videos on Allan Holdsworth. I am never going to be able to get close to the enigma. All I can be is like Icarus flying around the sun that is Allan Holdsworth. I didn't want to finish with that last video with John. Oh, this was his final years. He was a drinker and he was like this and he was like that and all that type of stuff. And I wanted to make the point that there's so many people have got a story about Allan. I never knew him. I have just said what I think. Everything I just said about him might be a pile of crap. But in hearing my discussion on Allan and what he made me feel and how I've been able to express this to you on this video, if you've got something from that, remember, I'm so happy that I've been able to do that, but I couldn't do that without, in my mind, the whole time, having Allan's music and Allan's genius and also Allan's personality, which seems beautiful to me. That has been sat there on my shoulder the whole time. Maybe next to Krishna and my dad. I hope you enjoyed this video on Allan Holdsworth. I think I'm finished. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more of these more esoteric videos, like and subscribe, put your comments on. Happy to do this discussion. You can become a patron, support me, become a member. I'm about to do a members video. I'm going to do a drum tuition video now for the members. Be about half an hour and then I'm done for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.